Alright, so the first thing that I like to do when starting a character is to actually put down some kind of floor. That way it'll be easier for me to line things up and later on be able to animate it as well. So I can go into the guide menu and I can toggle on the floor, and you'll notice that the puppet doesn't immediately align to the floor. I can fix this by turning on the grid, and then while holding onto the puppet, I can press triangle to align it to the grid and scoot it up into place. With all of that done, I am now able to alter the puppet's proportions to better fit the idea that I had in mind. To accomplish this, I am going to be using the stretch tool. And with this tool, I can grab onto any part of the puppet, and by pulling it in different directions, I'm able to alter the proportions. This is a step that I recommend you to take your time on to make sure that the skeleton of this puppet fits with the overall character design that you had in mind. Once you're done editing the proportions, you might notice that your puppet is misaligned from the base. A quick way to fix this is by turning on the mirror tool and then grabbing each part, and while holding on to each part, pressing triangle to realign it. So we can quickly go over each part and make sure that it's realigned, and as soon as everything is realigned, we can then move on to sculpting. I will begin by scoping into the head with L1 and X, and as you can see, it opens sculpt mode. As a personal preference, I like to set the visual feedback to minimal. What this does is it makes it easier for me to be able to compare all the different parts of the puppet to make sure that they all go well with each other, without having to look past any blurs or any grayscale effects. Since I want this to be symmetrical, I can go into the guide menu and I can turn on the mirror tool. This will make it so that whatever I do on one side will perfectly match to the other side. As another personal preference, I like to hide the mirror so as to minimize the amount of distractions that I will see on screen. I'm going to go back into my shapes and just select whatever shape I feel like working with today. By default, you'll be using the smear shape tool, which can be very useful depending on what you're going for. In my case, I'd rather it be something easier to place, so I'm going to be using the stamp tool. I can select it in the tools, or I can use the shortcut by holding L1 and pressing triangle. By pressing L1 and square, I'm able to change the blend amount to be able to hide any seams that might show up. Generally, I prefer the stamp shape tool because I feel like I have more control over it than I would with the smear shape tool. And once I'm happy with the overall shape, I can then stamp this shape into place, and I can move on from here. The next thing I'm going to want to do is create eyes, so I can go back into editing this head, and I'm going to use the sphere shape to cut out where I want the eyes to go. And I'm keeping the mirror tool on to make sure that both sides and both eyes will still be symmetrical. To create the eyes, I'm going to turn on grid snap and I'm going to make a clone of the head. Then in the clone head, I'm going to go in and delete the cutouts that I had previously made. Now I can grab this and I can scope it into the head below to then turn it into a group. So what this will do now is it'll turn it so that the head is actually a group where I can put multiple things in this one spot, but it'll still recognize it as a singular head. The benefit of this is I'm able to have a completely brand new sculpt that still shares the same placement as the first sculpt. In this case, the mirror is the same as it was earlier, although I'm working on a brand new sculpt. This will make it easier for me to keep things lined up. In an effort to make this look more like eyes, I'm going to go back in and I'm actually going to change the color using the spray paint tool. I'll start by selecting white and just making this big and spray painting over the whole entire thing. From here, I'm then actually going to be using this next tool, which is the surface snap. Currently it's turned off, and as you can see, when I try to paint in black, it doesn't always line up nicely to where the eye is. When I go in and out, it changes the sizing of it, which can make it hard to spray paint more complicated sculpts. But by turning on the surface snap, it perfectly sticks to, well, the surface. I'm then going to open the tweak menu for this sculpt because currently there's a problem. If I test out play mode by clicking the right thumbstick, you can then see that physics enable and drop the eyes out of the world. What I can do is I can go to the physical properties and set movable to off. Now when I press play, it stays in place as it should. I can also tweak the material to make the sculpt stand out even more. And I can also go into the head and I can spray paint on a mouth. And because surface snap is enabled, it makes it easy for me to paint on this object. Turning it off makes it a lot trickier because I have to make sure that it's still aligned to the sculpt while painting. And overall, this is a lot more noticeable when working with complex sculpts. Now that I'm overall happy with the sculpt that I've created, I can then go in and adjust the actual joints itself within the puppet. Depending on how much you alter the puppet itself, you might find that some of the joints that are already there might not perfectly line up to where you would expect them to be. In this case, I might want it so that the arms raise closer to the neck itself, so I can do that by going into the Show Hide menu and enabling both connectors and X-ray. Now, I'm able to see all the joints located within the puppet. By moving the joints, I'm now able to change exactly where the point of rotation is. For example, I can move the joint a little further into the body, and now, when I rotate the arm, it moves closer to the neck as I had originally wanted. But what can be tricky is making sure that both sides match, assuming that you have a symmetrical character. The easiest way to do this is by re-enabling the grid. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this one in once, so now I know that on the other side I can also move it in the exact same amount and it'll match up perfectly. Testing this out, I can then move the arms up and see that not only are they now symmetrically moving together, but also they move exactly the way I had originally wanted them to move. And if you want, you can go throughout the puppet and adjust every single joint to make sure that it moves in the way that you want it to move. With all of this done, we can move on to the most important part, and that is the grab point. If we go into the Show Hide menu and enable grab points, we can see currently where the grab point is. It's very important to make sure that your grab points are placed properly if you want others to be able to easily use your assets. As you can see on this ball, I made sure to place the grab point directly at the bottom of it to make it easy to place on the ground. Now, if we look at the second ball, we'll see that it's not even in view. It is here, but it's all the way up here. And the reason it's so high up is because the grab point was not placed properly. This is something that can upset a lot of people if you did not take the time to fix this. You always want to make sure that when designing assets to be used by the community, you make them as easy to be used as possible. The best way to think of it is you basically want to give people assets that are ready to go. So what we can do is we can then just turn on the grid, make sure grab point is on, and while holding onto it I can press triangle to align to the grid and place it where I want it to be. In this case, I think I'll put it by the feet to make it easy to place on the ground, but of course you can place your grab point wherever you like. And now, your character is ready to go. With that said, that will conclude this tutorial. Thank you very much for watching. And just make sure to keep a lookout because I'm expecting to have a few more videos finished and ready to go within the coming week or so. In the meantime, I hope all of you are doing well, and I just want to make sure to wish you a good night and sweet dreams.